The way it currently stands, forced labor, slavery takes precedence over rehabilitation and public safety.
Oh, by the way, while the Biden administration gives reparations to everyone but free people, look at the billions he has run over to Ukraine.
We don't have black grocery stores because if you think about it now, just to get in that supply chain, it's almost unheard of.
They don't want the truth to get out. Okay? I don't want to know what my family did or what all these people did and all this stuff like that. Okay?
Come on.
You read that 500-page report.
There's this thing called white superiority and black inferiority. That mindset allows all of the behaviors that we've seen across generations.
I had no idea that church I was running by every day was something my grandfather established.
This is not a handout. This is a debt that is owed.
You know, Allensworth was like the internet of his time in 1904, 1905.
The total black population in California is about 2.6 million. And then of that, the descendants compose about 2.2 million of that. So California, with a multi-billion-dollar surplus, can absolutely afford to satisfy the international terms for reparations, beginning with compensation.
Any financial obstacle that exists that impedes the success of increasing financial prosperity needs to be dealt with and eliminated.
No matter where we've been, no matter what part of this fight we've been in, we've been harmed, and we've had harm done to us specifically.
When I got to Los Angeles, this was some of the worst segregation I'd ever seen. And remember, I'm telling you, I'm from Mississippi.
Because as you can see, I'm giving you broken history right now, you know? But I had to give it to you guys today. I said, no, I got to show them this because it's so precious and nobody really knows about it.
Overnight, it's like, oh, it's no longer the quarters, now it's Lincoln Heights. Oh, so now we get to use Abraham Lincoln for our name. And you think about all the other people that they could have used, but they picked Lincoln. And I think that's sort of a stereotypical of what they do.
There wasn't any black restaurants. As far as black business and weed, it wasn't none.
Black people don't have that kind of luxury. Our historically black communities have been redistricted multiple times.
Why has it been easier for other groups than us?
Because of anti-black hatred.
Now listen, if you can't handle the TR room, don't tune in.
Welcome everyone. This is the second part of the California Reparations Task Force reading, the calculation recommendations. Shout out to Angela Nirvana in the Reparations Now documentary, which we have some great news about that. That news is soon to be coming. Definitely, which Angela, I don't want to misquote her, but if you can't handle the truth, then don't tune in. So I'm sure individuals who are listening to this want to have the truth. So let's get to some truth, shall we? But before we actually start the reading, let's do some in-house keeping real quick. So we're actually going to have a community call-in show. We're going to do a recap specifically of the Oakland task force hearing that was on 5/6 on Saturday. Call in and you might have a chance to win something. We're going to ask you some reparations questions, maybe from tonight, maybe from yesterday, maybe from a year ago, maybe from 2 years ago, regarding AB 3121 and other reparations movement here in California. We might even talk about some federal reparations as well, ask some questions to y'all. So yes, do not miss that. That's going to be next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. That's 5/17. It's May 17th, 2023. That's Wednesday, 7 p.m. PST on Emin the Mass Media Group. Hopefully we'll be or I'll be joined by the one and only one of the great queens of reparations herself, Miss Kim. And I'm gonna try to see if we can get some other people on the platform so we can get this recap going. Some very interesting stuff happened last Saturday. If you haven't seen it, please go watch the full day's worth of the California Reparations Task Force hearing right here on Emin the Mass Media Group. All right, so let's see here. And let's just give a shout out to our family here. You have to be how old to get reparations? You know what, poet author? That is a great question. So let's see what the reading or the documentation has to say tonight about that. All right, let's see. Let me go here. All right, so yesterday in the reading, the California Reparations Task Force mentioned that the California Freedmen's Bureau could possibly, or Freedmen's Bureau of Affairs could possibly use something like the compensation board here in California. That's already an example. So if y'all have a chance, go check this online. This is a victims compensation board where it looks like somebody who's been a victim of crime can go in and apply for compensation, upload and submit documents. So, I think the task force and the community at large has done a great job to point out some of the recommendations that are currently in our system. So it looks like this infrastructure is already set up here in California. So guess what? All we would have to do is take this template and create something for Black folk, right? All right, so let's get busy, shall we? I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Okay, let me blow it up just a little bit so the family can see it. All right, is that good? Yeah, I think that's pretty good. All right, so let's get busy here. So yesterday we left off at Atrocity 3, housing discrimination. All right, let's get my libation real quick. All right, let's go. Okay, Atrocity 3, housing. I'm sorry, just real quick. I just want to make sure the music is not overpowering my voice here. All right, let's go. Atrocity 3, housing discrimination. As detailed in Chapter 5, housing segregation, federal, state, and local government officials discriminated against and segregated African American residents throughout California. From the beginnings of the state's founding, individual participants in the housing market discriminated against African American buyers or renters. Local zoning rules enforced segregation, and the state allowed this discrimination to occur, even though the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional in Buchanan versus Worley, 1917, 245 U.S. 60. As a result, in 2019, a year before the Reparations Task Force was established, African American Californians controlled far less of the state's average per capita housing wealth than did white Californians. The task force presents two potential methods to calculate the losses due to housing discrimination. The first calculates all monetary losses due to racial housing discrimination by calculating the average per capita white to African American home ownership wealth gap in 2019 and compounding interest on that gap until 2022. However, critics may object that by sweeping in all forms of housing discrimination, this method does not focus on discrete forms of housing discrimination by state actors. The second method offered here calculates monetary losses specifically due to redlining. As discussed in Chapter 5, housing segregation, redlining is a clear case of state-sanctioned housing discrimination beginning with New Deal in 1933. and lasting for 44 years until the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 formally, although effectively sought to combat the persisting effects of redlining. While redlining denied federally insured affordable mortgages to those in African American neighborhoods based on federal law, California could have insured redline homes in place of the federal government to address this injustice in a timely fashion. But not only did California not engage in any policies to ameliorate the effect of federal redlining, it embraced redlining policies and other policies discriminating against African Americans, Californians. Local zoning laws discriminated against African Americans in every corner of the United States, including California, with, quote, zoning rules decreeing separate living areas for Black and white families, prohibiting African Americans from buying homes on blocks where whites were a majority, and vice versa. The U.S. Supreme Court eventually ruled these expressly discriminatory zoning laws unconstitutional in 1917, but this ruling was often ignored by government entities as well as individuals. Okay, just a quick interjection. We actually have an example of this in our reparations documentary, so I can't wait for y'all to check that out. But yeah, this was ubiquitous here in California. Probably still is in some cases. All right, let's continue. In addition, as discussed in Chapter 5, housing segregation, the discriminatory government policy of redlining has created devastating and persisting consequences for African American communities. The redlining was instituted through federal law. That policy shaped home ownership through bank financing, and banks in this country have long been subject to a dual banking system, subject to parallel state and federal regulation. Thus, California's parallel duty to regulate banks gave it the authority to treat African Americans equitably, encourage residential integration, and to provide state-level insurance for mortgages purchased by residents in redline areas ineligible for federally insured mortgages. Instead, California failed to act until decades later, sanctioning or maintaining redlining discrimination against its African American residents, giving the state a responsibility to redress intergenerational wealth harms resulting from Congress discrimination in California. Before the federal government began insuring mortgages in 1933, homeownership remained prohibitively expensive for working and middle-class families. Bank mortgages typically required 50% down, interest-only payments, and repayment in full after 5 to 7 years, at which point the borrower would have to refinance or find another bank to issue a new mortgage with similar terms. These remain the conditions for African American borrowers even after 1933, while for white borrowers, the HOLC not only subsidized the mortgages with much lower interest rates, the HOLC also rescued and refinanced white families' existing mortgages subject to imminent foreclosures, issuing them new mortgages with repayment schedules of up to 15 years, later extended to 25 years. In addition, HOLC mortgages were amortized, meaning that when the loan was paid off, white borrowers would own the home. Since African American home buyers were excluded from government-insured mortgages, they depended on traditional financing models with much more expensive or risky conditions. To the extent that they could even attempt to afford a home that would otherwise have been heavily subsidized for a white home buyer. The result was a growing racial home ownership gap. Given the financial consequences of redlining, 2 scholars have proposed the following loss estimation procedure. The differences in mean household wealth attributable to home ownership multiplied by the number of African American households in California. The task force experts agree that the formula provides a reasonable estimate of the aggregate debt resulting from housing and lending discrimination. This report offers 2 potential ways to perform that calculation here. 1, using 2019 data to estimate losses due primarily to all forms of housing discrimination until the present, or 2, using 1930 and 1980 data to estimate losses due primarily to redlining. Method 1, estimating financial losses due to all forms of housing discrimination until the present. In 2019, 1 year before the legislature enacted AB 3121, and 1 year before the COVID-19 pandemic, the average African-American non-Hispanic home in California had a value of $435,300, and the average white non-Hispanic home had a value of $773,400. At the time, about 36.8% of Black Californian households owned their own home, while 63.2% of white California households did, reflecting a home ownership gap of 26.4 percentage points. Using 2019 census figures for the average number of people living in African American and white California households, the experts estimated the total wealth and home values controlled collectively by African American and white Californians. 2,213,986 African Americans living in California in 2019, 2.44 average number of African Americans per household in 2019 equals 907,371 African American households in California. 14,364,928 white Americans live in California, 2.36 average number of white Americans per household in 2019. 6,086,834 white households in California. The experts then estimated the total wealth in homes controlled in 2019 collectively by all African American non-Hispanic California households, and the total wealth in homes controlled in 2019 collectively by all white Californian households. 435,300, 907,371 African American households in California, 0.368 equals 145,352,123,438 in home ownership wealth owned by African American Californians in 2019. 773,400, 6,086,834 white households in California, which is 0.632, equals 2,900,000. Oh, wait a minute. Let me look at this number again, make sure I got this right. It's 1,000. Okay, wait a minute. All right, is that trillion? Let me see. That's 1,000, million, billion. All right, family. I think this is trillion, y'all. So if y'all see that's trillion, let me know. Because it's looking like a trillion to me. So hopefully I'm not okay. So I think this is 2,975,176,286,659 in home ownership wealth owned by white Californians in 2019. Okay, I'm just gonna put that figure in the chat, y'all, because I was tripping. I thought it was just me. I was gonna say 2 billion. So yeah, family, let me know if that's right, because it looks to me like 2 trillion. Could be wrong. Anyway, after calculating the total housing wealth controlled by each of the 2 racial groups, the experts computed the estimated per capita amount in each group, including those who do not own houses due to housing discrimination. 145,352,123,438 divided by 2,213,986 African Americans in California equals 65,652 per capita African American California home ownership wealth. So we got 65,000 for African American Californians, and let's see what white people get. All right. See this long number again. 2,975,176,000. Sorry. 2,975,176,286,659 divided by 14,364,928. White Californians equals 207,114 per capita white California home ownership wealth. All right. Comparing the two shows an estimated per capita home ownership wealth gap of $141,462 in 2019. Adding a compounded annual 30-year mortgage interest rate 3.10% in 2020, see table 1 below, the African American and white home ownership gap in California in 2020 is approximately $145,847 in 2020 dollars. All right, so I guess let's go through the calculation here. The equation. 141,462 plus 141,462, which is 0.031, equals 145,847 in 2020 dollars, rounded to the nearest dollar in each step. While this figure represents the cumulative effect of all sources of discrimination, individual level, homeowners, real estate agents, corporate, banks, and local zoning, as well as state and federal level redlining, it represents a cautious estimate because it assumes that reparations for de jure discrimination, i.e. redlining, should not have been paid earlier, i.e. after 1977 when the federal government passed a law attempting to counteract the persisting effects of redlining. Alternatively, the legislature could estimate the financial losses due to housing discrimination by calculating losses due primarily to redlining. This process follows a similar method to the one used above, but uses data instead from 1930, 3 years before the start of federal redlining in 1933 and 1980, 3 years after the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 formally sought to end private lending practices that reproduce redlining. While the task force would ideally use data from 1933 and 1977 to perform this calculation, at the time of this report, relevant data from those years is unavailable, and the task force relies instead on data from the nearest decimal decennial censuses 1930 and 1980. In 1930, African American homes in California had a mean value of $4,535, and white homes in California had a mean value of $6,067, reflecting a 1,532 difference. That year, there were 22,595 African American households and 1,482,203 white households in California. At the time in California, about 37.6% of African Americans own their home versus 48.2% of white Americans, revealing a home ownership gap of 10.6%. From this data, the task force experts estimated the total wealth held in home values collectively by African Americans and white Californians. The task force expert team estimated the total wealth in homes held in each year for 1930, 4,535 mean value of an African American home in California in 1930, 22,595 African American households in California in 1930, 0.376 equals $38,528,090 total African American wealth in California homes in 1930. 6,067 mean value of a white home in California in 1930, 1,482,203 white households in California in 1930, 0.482 equals 4,334. Wait. Okay, my bad. 4,334,397,340 total white wealth in California homes in 1930. Calculating the total wealth held by each of the two racial groups, they then computed the estimated wealth per capita, i.e. per person in each group, whether homeowner or not. 38,528,090 total African American wealth in California homes in 1930, divided by 81,048 African Americans in California in 1930 equals $475 African American per capita wealth in California homes in 1930. Let's see here. $4,334,397,340 total white wealth in California homes in 1930, divided by 5,408,260 white Americans in California in 1930, equals $801 white per capita wealth in California homes in 1930. Taking the difference between the two, $801 subtracted by $475 results in an estimated per capita African American white home value wealth gap of $326 in 1930 dollars, favoring white Californians. This gap represents the unequal starting positions for African American and white Californians even before the federal government massively subsidized white home ownership while excluding African American applicants through the New Deal and GI Bill. All right. The experts then repeated the calculation with data from 1980, 3 years after the federal government attempted to end the effects of redlining through the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA of 1977, because the 1980 census did not provide a breakdown of white or African Americans per household in California. The experts calculated this figure by dividing the total number of white and African American Californians by the mean or average number of white Americans and African Americans per household that year. 1,890,281 African Americans in California in 1980 divided by 3.67 average number of African Americans per household in 1980 equals 495,717 African American households. 18,030,893 white Americans in California in 1980 divided by 3.22 average number of white Americans per household equals 5,599,656 white American California households. In 1980, the average African American non-Hispanic California was worth $66,670, and the average white Hispanic California home worth an estimated $100,516 in 1980 dollars. The California home ownership gap in 1980 amounted to 20.1 percentage points, with 40.6% of Black homes being owner-occupied and 60.7% of white homes being owner-occupied. 66,670 average value of an African-American home in California in 1980. 495,717 African-American households in California in 1980. 0.406 equals. Okay. 13,418,077,670 total home ownership wealth of African Americans in California in 1980. 100,516 average value of a white home in California in 1980. 5,599,656 white American households in California in 1980. 0.607 equals 341,652,998,655 total home ownership wealth of white Americans in California. All right. Divided by the entire African American population in California in 1980 and the entire white population in California in 1980, respectively, each of these estimates yields the per capita wealth in homes held by each group. The estimated average per capita African American wealth in California homes in 1980 amounted to $7,375, and the estimated per capita white home ownership wealth in California homes amounted to $18,948. In short, white California's per capita home wealth was $11,537 in 1980 dollars greater than that of African American Californians. To identify how much of the 1980 per capita home ownership wealth gap was due to California's complicity in federal redlining discrimination, the 1930 per capita home ownership wealth gap can be subtracted from the 1980 value. After adjusting the 1930 per capita home ownership wealth gap into its equivalent purchasing power in 1980 dollars, subtracting the 1930 per capita home ownership wealth gap from the 1980 per capita home ownership wealth gap, 11,537 minus 1,483, results in a redlining per capita wealth gap of 10,054. Quantifying how much Black Californians lost in home ownership wealth due to federal redline discrimination and California's complicity in this policy. Compounding 10,054 up to 2020 using the annual 30-year mortgage interest rate yields a per capita value of $160,931 in 2020 dollars. In other words, the task force expert team calculates that discriminatory redlining facilitated by the state of California caused the average African American in California to lose $160,931 in home ownership wealth. So once again, that's $160,931 in home ownership wealth. To estimate a hypothetical amount California might have to pay to make up only for redlining, the expert team multiply the average loss to African American Californians due to redlining with the number of African Americans living in the state in 1980, while the task force recommendations reparation payments to a defined eligible class, specifically because the U.S. Census does not currently identify individuals in a manner that would allow them to be categorized in this way. This report uses the number of census respondents who identified as Black or African American alone as a rough estimate. Multiplying the average per capita housing wealth gap in 2020 dollars, $160,931, with the number of African American residents in California in 1980, 1,819,281 yields $292,770,710,611, or approximately $293 billion in 2020 dollars, rounded to the nearest dollar. If all 1,906,911 African American non-Hispanic California residents who lived in the state in 2020 were eligible, each would receive housing reparations up to $148,099 or $3,366 for each year between 1933 and 1977, spent as a resident of the state of California. A note on houselessness. Originally, the task force asked its economic experts to include housing discrimination calculations for the losses to African Americans in California from houselessness. This, however, proved difficult for both conceptual reasons and lack of data. While housing discrimination is one major factor causing disproportionate African American houselessness in California, there are other factors. For example, from the late 1950s to the early 1980s, a movement for the deinstitutionalization and local care of the mentally ill coincided with the Reagan administration's cuts to social services. As a result, deinstitutionalized individuals suffering from mental illness and other conditions swelled the rank of the homeless population, not only in California but nationwide. Owning a larger share of the real estate, it was easier for white households to absorb the effects of deinstitutionalization than it was for African American households. Another factor is the war on drugs that caused not only a massively disproportionate incarceration of African Americans, but also unemployed and houselessness in many economically depressed African American communities. Once incarcerated, African Americans were eventually released. See the discussed on atrocity number 2 above. One approach to estimating reparations for African American houselessness caused by discrimination might be to establish the percentage of houseless African Americans in California disproportionate to the percentage of African Americans in the California population, and to multiply this number with the state average price of a one-bedroom apartment. This calculation would assume that the percent of African Americans in California who are houseless would have been equal to the percent of white people who are houseless, if not for the various forms of discrimination documented in chapters 2 through 18 of this report. So I'm going to kind of shrink this, and then I'll enlarge it as we go down. So it looks like in this table 1 here, for those who are listening, and for those who can see the graph up here, as we go down the list, I'll blow it up. But this looks like it's from Freddie Mac. 30-year mortgage rates for compounding of uncompensated per capita wealth gap due to redlining. So it looks like they start on the year 1980 with the mortgage interest rate of 13.7%. Uncompensated per capita wealth gap due to redlining 10,054. All right, so I'm gonna blow that up some more. All right, and if you scroll down, it goes from 1980 all the way to 2020 at 3.1%. In 2020, looks like it's valued at uncompensated per capita wealth gap due to redlining in 2020 is $160,931.27. All right, let's see here. All right, family. Atrocity 4, unjust property takings. All right, just give me a quick minute and I will be right back. All right, family. Back, had to just take a quick break. All right, let's go. Atrocity 4, unjust property takings. Oh, thanks everyone. Just real quick, if you could please like, share, and subscribe. Send this out. Let people see the replay. We greatly appreciate that. All right, here we go. Oh, one more thing. If you can support us on, I think it's etmgroupstore.com. I think we have some like merch up there. Anyway, I'll put it in the chat before we leave. Right now I'm so focused on this reading, forgetting our own merch store. Anyway, let's continue. Atrocity 4, unjust property takings. As documented in Chapter 5, Housing and Segregation, California built its cities over the bones of the African American neighborhoods that it tore apart through eminent domain, building the highways, cities, and parks that have enabled the state of California to become the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world. The unjust taking of land did more than just seize property. It destroyed communities and forced African Americans out of their historical neighborhoods. At its peak in 1980, 7.7% of the population in California was African American. All right, I just had to pause real quick, just so that number. All right, at its peak in 1980, 7.7% of the population in California was African American. By 2020, the number dropped to about 6%. In 2018 alone, 75,000 Black Americans left the state. The state's more expensive coastal cities alone have shed 275,000 Black residents. All right, family. I don't even know I'm getting emotional right now. Please, I just need to take a quick pause, man. I just need to take a quick pause. All right, let's do it. Thanks for tuning in, family. Appreciate y'all. Appreciate it. Okay, let's go. Due to the voluminous records associated with the state's many eminent domain actions throughout history, the task force and its experts did not have sufficient capacity within the lifespan of the task force to provide a calculation of the harm caused by unjust property takings throughout California. Nevertheless, the task force economic expert team explored two potential methods to quantify the damage caused by these actions, examining the displacement of Black Californians by the state and its local governments through eminent domain. The legislature could calculate the loss in property value experienced by displaced African Americans. This could be accomplished by examining the market value of the seized property at the time it was taken, subtracting the amount paid to the owner after eminent domain, and adding the increase in the property's net value by adding in a fair measure of the estimated appreciation to the present day. A second method of estimating loss could measure the compensation due by using the current value of the property seized from African Americans. These methods for calculating harm are complicated if the property value has declined in value since it was seized, or if the seized property is now being used for infrastructure whose value is difficult to quantify. But based on its experts' recommendations, the task force suggests some strategies to assist the legislature in overcoming that hurdle. The task force recommends that the legislature consider the factors below when calculating the harm caused by these unjust takings. All right, so for those that are listening and can't see the screen, there's a graph. It says property takings, and then it's in orange, and then it has some lines. It's like extending out to some of those items that deal with property taking. So one of the line items is property sold. Another is remained at property. Another is lost value / profits from business. And another is adverse health outcomes. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 items associated with property takings in that graph. All right. Let's continue. While the records of harm under this atrocity prove too voluminous to provide a calculation in this report highlights several instances of eminent domain and unjust takings that the legislature should examine at minimum when calculating the harm caused. As discussed in Chapter 5, Housing Segregation in the 1940s and 1950s, African Americans lived San Francisco's Fillmore district, forming a vibrant community known as the Harlem of the West. But the African American community there was destroyed by unjust takings and urban renewal projects during the 1960s and 1970s. Between 1970 and 2010, San Francisco's Black population declined about 7%, or about 96,000 people. Despite the overall population growth of the city, similarly in Palm Springs, the city's redevelopment plan in the 1960s destroyed an integrated neighborhood on part of the Agua Caliente band of Cayuya Indians tribal reservation, forcing out many of the African American residents that had resided in that neighborhood. And in Hayward, shout out to Hayward, redevelopment projects in the 1960s likewise destroyed African American homes and businesses. Alrighty. These instances reflect just a few examples of state and local agencies' active role in the destruction of African American homes to advance political ends, to investigate the degree to which the state has displaced African American families to pursue its projects. The task force recommends that the legislature study or elicit a further report from one or more state agencies with specific responsibility for this area, such as the California Department of Transportation, California Department of General Services, or the California Natural Resources Agency. The history of the state's construction of its roads, railways, highways, bridges, water systems, dams, airports, and other major infrastructure, as these all reflect public projects that may have been built by displacing African American families from their land. For instance, when President Eisenhower created the federal interstate highway system in 1956, developers tore through the nation's cities and towns when freeways that carved up Black communities, including freeways in California. The construction of Interstate 10 required the demolition of the Black neighborhood of Sugar Hill, as well as the Pico neighborhood, forcing out many more Black families. The creation of Interstate 105, the Century Freeway, also threatened numerous African American communities, prompting legal challenges from the NAACP. Okay, so let's go back. Let's see. Construction of Interstate 10, Pico neighborhood. Okay, so for those who aren't familiar with Los Angeles, did they say somewhere in Los Angeles? Maybe they will. I lived in LA for about 18 to 20 years. So I believe Pico, which I'm familiar with that area, creation of Interstate 105, and those LA, California family are probably familiar with the creation of the 105. Yeah, I'm correct. This is in Los Angeles. The Century Freeway also threatened numerous African American communities, prompting legal challenges from the NAACP. These events and the many more unjust takings throughout California history must be cataloged and studied by the legislature to provide a full calculation of the harm caused by the state's seizure or destruction of African American property. Atrocity 5, devaluation of African American businesses. Wow, family. We are almost there to the end, y'all. Whoa. At least with this program here, but let's continue. Atrocity 5, devaluation of African American businesses. Shout out to all our Black businesses, our Black California businesses, our nationwide Black businesses out there. If you entrepreneurship all the way to owning a corporation, shout out to you. Atrocity 5, devaluation of African American businesses. As detailed in chapters 10 and 13, discriminatory policies resulted in the decimation and devaluation of African American businesses. Business formation results from a combination of factors creating demand for businesses, including the public sector, households, businesses to business transaction, B2B, and the entrepreneurial environment, as well as existing rules, regulations, and taxes. But as documented in chapters 10 and 13, the doors to entrepreneurial opportunity have been much less available to the state's African American residents than its white ones due to discrimination and its effects, including sharp differences in access to capital and equity, While the lack of business data collected by the state of California limited the task force experts' ability to quantify the harms caused by discrimination against African American businesses, other available data from the United States Census can be used to approximate some of those harms. Based on its experts' analysis, the task force recommends a method for the legislature to calculate the harms caused by discrimination against African American businesses based on the expected number of African American businesses that should exist in California, given the state's policies, aggregate household incomes, and demand for public investments, goods, and services. The state of California does not collect information on business establishments by race and does not maintain a database of contractors at the state or local level by race. Instead, the task force experts review the U.S. Census Bureau's Survey of Business Owners, which provides information about businesses, including information distinguished by race. The most recent data from the Census Survey of Business Ownership is from the 2012. Okay. Though the census only gives a snapshot of differences in business ownership in 2012, it displays the total wealth acquired by African American versus white businesses in California, reflecting the cumulative effects of racial inequalities resulting from actions by the state of California. As a result, it provides a guide for measuring the losses to businesses or business wealth caused by discrimination. In 2012, the U.S. Census Bureau reported that there were 1,875,847 white non-Hispanic owned firms in California, compared to 166,553 African American non-Hispanic owned firms. Given California's population in 2012, the state had a business ownership rate of roughly 806.7 firms per 10,000 white residents and 738.9 per 10,000 African American residents. The white non-Hispanic owned firms had total sales, receipts, or value of shipments totaling around 1.14 trillion, while African American non-Hispanic owned firms had about 14 billion. In other words, white owned firms had total sales, receipts, or value of shipments 80 times larger than that of black-owned firms. Census data show that African American owned businesses are not yet, Census data show that African American owned businesses are not overrepresented in the type of ethnic enclave industries of accommodations and food services or retail sales catering towards an African American market. So, if there were no discriminatory restrictions on access to capital or business equity, that is, if African American and white entrepreneurs competed on an equal playing field, the industry of African American and white businesses would be far more similar, reflecting the business opportunities that exist in California. For instance, the discrimination documented in this report explains why African American businesses lag behind white ones in the construction industry, a capital-intensive industry where access to government contracts matters greatly. The history and ongoing effects of residential segregation and redlining further limited opportunities for African American construction firms in the private sector, highlighting again how discrimination has produced the African American and white business wealth gap in construction, a trend that reoccurs across nearly every other industry. All right. So in this graph, if I'm looking at it correctly, at the top, it says number of firms with or without paid employees per 10,000 population, California 2012 U.S. Census Survey of Business Owners. All right. And then at the bottom, it looks like it has the types of industries at the bottom, and then I believe I'm correct. On the left-hand side, It is, looks like the total number of firms, I believe, per 10,000 population. All right, so some of the number of, all right, so in the blue is black firms, and then in red is white firms. All right, and I'm just going to name off just a couple. So you have agricultural forestry, mining, quarrying, which, by the way, I don't see any black firms there, and then utilities. Wow, it looks like there aren't any black or white there during 2012. Okay. Construction, you have black owned, and then you have white owned. All right, so that's at 20, and then a little bit above 20, and then white is at 60. Manufacturing, black, it's a little above 0, so white is above 20. Wholesale trade, retail trade, transportation and warehousing. All right. Wow. Okay. So it looks like transportation and housing in the 2012 U.S. survey, blacks actually had more in transportation and warehousing. Interesting, than whites. Information, finance and insurance, real estate and rental leasing. Looks like professional, scientific, and technical services. Management of companies and enterprises, administrative support and waste management and remediation, educational services. Looks like blacks actually beat out whites in that category. Educational services, healthcare and social assistance. Interesting, blacks actually beat out whites in that one, if I'm correct. Arts, entertainment, and recreation. That's pretty much tied between blacks and whites. Accommodation and food services, whites really interested in blacks, and industries not classified. Okay, so overall looks like whites in every category for the most part outnumbered the number of firms. Whites outnumber the number of firms than blacks. All right, so let's continue. And thanks everyone. I appreciate your patience in this. I'm also kind of doing this because I don't know if we have any people who might be listening to this who might be like seeing impaired. So, I try to, be cognizant of that as well, because you just never know who's going to be listening. All right. As a matter of fact, before I go, I actually volunteered at the California State Braille Library audio department a couple years ago. So that's why, I'm a little more aware when I'm kind of talking about these graphs. So I don't want you to think that somehow, I'm kind of just taking my time because I want to take my time. But yeah, I'm just kind of, thinking about, some others who might be listening to this. And, you might be out there, doing something else and explaining this stuff. So just trying to be as detailed as possible. Anyway, let's continue. The task force recommends estimating the effect of discrimination against African American businesses by implementing an equation that calculates a figure for each state separately based on the general demand environment of state and local government contracting and household income. Controlling for each state allows us to then control for differences in each state's business environment. Then estimates can incorporate the number of businesses formed and sales and receipts generated on those factors. This is an approach used by many sociologists researching differences in business formation using the business environment. All right. This method of calculation, however, relies only on the raw number of businesses and the gap in ownership numbers between African American and white residents. It does not estimate the loss in businesses' wealth due to discrimination based on the volume of businesses that would be expected for a state with California's public expenditures and household income. To also account for the expected number of businesses absent discrimination when estimating business losses due to discrimination, the task force, based on its experts' analysis, proposes the legislature employ the following formula. Y'all, I am not a mathematician, so I think you guys can see this graph. I don't know if y'all can see. So for y'all mathematicians out there, do your thing, but I'm just going to do my best to calculate this formula. Hopefully the bottom will have some references to what all these numbers mean. It looks like it does. So you guys see that, but as I said before, I'm just going to kind of read. Let me read through the bottom. Let me see. Let me just kind of go down a little bit here. All right. So let me read the paragraph at the bottom, and then let me see if I can go from our left to right. Man, dang, I know I went to college and all, but man, I think I may have gotten up to pre-cal, I think, and I don't remember none of this stuff. Anyway, just being real. All right, here we go. F is the number of businesses. Okay, so we have F in each state in 2012 for a given race, non-Hispanic, African Americans, and total. And FGE is a function of G, which represents the level of state and local government expenditures in each state and the District of Columbia. E represents the level of personal income in each state. I believe that's a B. Is a parameter estimating the effects of race. R equals 1 for African Americans on the number on businesses in each state. And Y is a parameter to be estimated where R equals 1 for African Americans in California on the effect of being African American in California compared to the average effect of being African American in the other states. And the parameter, I don't even know, that looks like some kind of math term, is a vector of fixed effects estimated for each state using a matrix of design variables for each state. And I don't even know what that is for real, but anyway, some symbol with the 0 with the halfway mark between, split down the 0, estimates the mean number of firms per person in total and for the African American population, where PT is the total population and PB the African American population. Golly. No wonder they had some statisticians on this, man, and economists. Boy, more power to them. Actually, I'm going to try to get, hopefully, Professor Kramer on here. Maybe we can kind of break down this formula. I think that'd be fun. And shout out to some of our statisticians, our black statisticians. Maybe we'll have, somebody else. Maybe we'll have a college student. I know my sister too, she's pretty intelligent, but I know my daughter, man, she's like a math wizard. I should probably send this over to her. Man, y'all, thanks for your patience. So seriously, if y'all know what this equation means, let me know. But obviously, the economists know, and that's why they are the experts. Let's continue. For G and E, the level of state and local government expenditures and personal income in each state, the task force experts used 2007 data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. The task force experts recommend use of 2007 data to ensure that the effects of government expenditures and personal income in each are exogenous. That is, to isolate the effect of government expenditures and personal income separate from the effect of the size of the firms in 2012, and because 2007 represents the previous peak in economy. The coefficient Y enables this report to estimate how many fewer businesses African American Californians were able to create, considering the average number of firms that would ordinarily be created by African Americans, given California's demand as estimated by the levels of state and local government expenditures and personal income. And as stated above, because of that average, let's see, and as stated above, because the average value of a business outside of the financial industry is generally 2.3 times the value of its total sales, the formula can calculate the financial losses in business value by multiplying 2.3 times the average values of sales by businesses in California with the number of African American owned firms that discrimination had prevented African American residents from creating. Once that amount of loss is determined, the task force recommends that the legislature calculate the total value of that loss if compounded interests were added to that figure until the present. Finally, the resulting sum can be divided by the number of African American residents in California to reflect the business's losses due to each resident because of the discrimination that produced these losses in African American business wealth. The result of the estimation is y equals negative 59950.91. That is, though, given fewer African American firms are created in each state than would be expected, given a state's leading demand or pull factors for businesses formation 0.09 per person compared to 0.05, the model's estimate of, I don't even know, looks like some math term or symbol. African Americans in California were able to create 59,951 firms fewer than African Americans in other states on average under the same circumstances. This gap reflects something that is unique to California that speaks to disadvantages peculiar to this state. Okay, I'm just going to take a real quick pause, real quick. Just take a quick breather. I appreciate y'all being here. And just give me about another 30 seconds and I will be right back. Okay, so let's go. Whew. All right, let's see. I think we ended up. Yeah, the average sales of firms in California, according to the. Wait, yeah, ready to go. Trying to make sure I was off mute. All right. The average sales of firms in California, according to the 2012 U.S. Census Survey, was 1,103,966. Because the average value of a non-financial business is generally 2.3 times its sales value, that would give these firms an average value of approximately $2,539,122. Multiplying that value times the missing number of businesses yields. Man, y'all, they're throwing out some serious numbers here. Jesus. Okay, let me do Okay. $152,222,903,022 in missing African American business as well in California. Okay. Lord. All right, y'all. I'm going to say that one more time. Multiplying that value times the missing number of businesses yields 152,222,903,022 in missing African business wealth. All right. Okay, let's go. We're almost done, family. We're almost there. Appreciate your patience. All right. Other harms and atrocities. Although the task force and its experts attempted to quantify 5 major categories of atrocities and harms, its focus on those 5 categories was due in part to the availability of data or the feasibility of creating a method for financially quantifying the harm caused. Other harms that should or may conclude compensation, reparations, and or redress by California include labor discrimination, segregated education, lack of representation in government, environmental harm, transgenerational harm, and other harms. Of these, only labor discrimination includes sufficient data for the task force to offer a recommendation as to calculation. For New Deal-based labor discrimination, the task force suggests that the legislature quantify harm using historical data beginning in 1933, when farm laborers and domestic service laborers, industries in which African Americans were overrepresented, were excluded from progressive labor legislation. This calculation could further use data up until when Congress enacted Title 8 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, prohibiting racial, let's see, oh no, I'm sorry, what is that? Let me go back. Let me just get my Roman numerals right, family. I don't want to be up here making mistakes. Okay. That is not 8. That is 7. All right. So Congress enacted Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, prohibiting racial discrimination in businesses with over 25 employees. Of course, de jure labor discrimination in California likely goes back to the founding of the state, and de facto labor discrimination continues unbated to this day, meaning this formula would capture only a piece of the financial losses suffered due to racial discrimination. Based on its experts' analysis, the task force recommends the legislature calculate the loss to Black Americans from discrimination in employment rather than the gains to whites. This measurement consists of 2 major components. 1, a reduction in wages, and 2, a greater likelihood of being unemployed. A suitable annual, quote, loss function, end quote, could take the following form. L equals D times W times H plus A times C plus W times C. All right. Where L equals lost wages, D equals the average percentage reduction in wages due to discrimination or the discrimination coefficient, W equals the average white wage, A equals the average African American wage, H equals total hours African Americans work for pay in a given year, and C, the total hours of work African Americans were denied by discrimination. For example, using national data from 2019, the method the task force recommends for estimating loss in earnings due to discrimination in employment might work as follows. First, the average wage gap can reflect the amount of wages lost due to pay discrimination in 2019. The average wage for white workers was $29.33 per hour, and the average wage for African American workers was $24.83 per hour. Assuming conservatively that African Americans lost 5% of what white workers earn on average due to employment discrimination, as opposed to taking the full difference between average white and African American wages as wages lost due to employment discrimination, the hourly wage loss for each African American worker due to discrimination would be $1.47. If the typical full-time worker was paid for 48 weeks, 5 days a week, for an 8-hour workday, the typical full-time worker would have worked 1,920 total hours in a year. If there were about 20 million African American labor force participants and a 6.1% annual employment rate, 18.6 million Black Americans worked for pay for over 35.7 billion hours in the year. The value of H in the formula above, multiplying H by 1.47, leads to an estimated loss of approximately 52.48 billion due to unequal pay from discrimination. I'm going to read that one more time. Multiplying H by 1.47 leads to an estimated loss of approximately 52.48 billion due to unequal pay from discrimination. Second, the difference in the African American and white unemployment rates in 2019 can be used to calculate the amount of wages lost due to unemployment caused by discrimination. In 2019, the white rate of unemployment was 3.3% compared to the African American rate of unemployment at 6.1%. Subtracting 3.3% from 6.1% results in an African American and white unemployment gap of 2.8%. Multiplying 20 million African American labor force participants by the 2.8% unemployment gap yields 360,000 African Americans subjected to excess unemployment. Then multiplying 360,000 African Americans by 1920 annual hours leads to a total of 691.2 million hours of work lost to discrimination. The value of C. Multiplying C by the average African American wage increased by the amount assumed to have been lost due to discrimination, $24.83 plus $1.47, leads to an estimated loss of approximately 18.18 billion due to the fully denied wages due to discrimination. Adding together the estimated losses due to unequal pay, 52.48 billion, and the estimated losses due to unequal unemployment, 18.18 billion, amounts to an aggregate loss of approximately 70.66 billion in 2019 for African American workers due to discrimination. Dividing that total amount by the number of African American labor force participants, this amounts to an average loss of about 35,742 per African American labor force participant nationwide in 2019. While the task force experts provided a potential methodology to calculate labor harms, for the remaining harms and atrocities not addressed in this chapter, the task force had insufficient data to recommend further methodologies for calculating reparations. Accordingly, the task force recommends that the legislature conduct a further analysis regarding the development of data and quantification of cumulative reparations, and in the period following, an appropriate down payment, quote unquote, of an initial meaningful amount of reparations and the creation of appropriate claims and compensations programs. The legislature should complete the California Reparations Program by quantifying and paying cumulative reparations for all the atrocities and harms raised herein. Wow. Alrighty, so that is it. Once again, this is part 2, but yesterday was part 1 of the final recommendations of the task force regarding calculations of losses to African American descendants of a chattel enslaved person or descendants of a free Black person living in the United States prior to the end of the 19th century in forms of compensation and restitution. All right, family. So I'm just going to go through some of these comments here, and then we are going to call it a night. So once again, everybody, I really appreciate your time and energy. There's a lot of information to decipher and go through. Yeah, you know, it is it's that time. You know, I mean, obviously it's going to be up to the legislature and possibly the governor to vote on these recommendations. But let's see what knows what's going to happen. So shout out to Cut the Check. Thank you, brother, for this platform. Doing a great job. Appreciate that. Hello again, everyone. What's up, Carolyn? Appreciate you. All right, what else is here? We also need a RV camper program for our people. That's facts. Very true. Yes, it's $1 trillion. Okay, thank you for that confirmation, because I was kind of tripping. All right, yeah. Okay. What else have we got here? They have trends in homes just in California. Facts. All right, Tanisha, appreciate you. Thank you for coming through. I sound so like a teenager. Woo, thank you for that. All right. Shout out to Maureen Simmons in the building. And by the way, definitely shout out to Maureen. She is in the Reparations Now documentary. And if y'all don't know Maureen Simmons, she was one of the instrumental figures in developing AB 3121. So I got to give flowers to our sister, the great, the queen, Maureen Simmons in the building. Thank you for your due diligence and your effort in this movement. And once again, shout out to Carolyn. Thanks, appreciate you. Yes, appreciate y'all. All right, so that's a wrap up. So yeah, family, we're gonna call it for tonight. But if you have a chance, please come back. Hopefully we can have some other guests, because I know y'all appreciate my Barry White voice, my young Barry White voice. But I like to, include some of our other family members, and you have a chance to speak your speech, to say what you want to say. And we really appreciate that if you come on in. We haven't actually had a community call-in show in a while now. It's been a few months. So please come and participate. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are giving away some prizes. But you got to be on your reparations game. Got to be on your reparations game. So yes, family, that's it. If you have any questions or anything, you can hit us up at etmmediagroup@gmail.com. That's etmmediagroup@gmail.com. And if you can, family, go check out our store. I'm going to put it in the chat. I think somebody's avatar was something like cut the check or something like that. Maybe I think it was, or something like that. Yeah, I'm going to put the link in the chat. Yeah, check out our store. We do have some cut the check merchandise in the building. We got some reparations now. What else do we have there? We got policy over party. We got policy over party. And what else we got? Yep, cut the check. Yeah, got some American Freedmen stuff up there. So yeah, family, if you can, go check it out. If you can support, cool. If not, no worries. At least if you can, at minimum, like, share, and subscribe to this video. Please do that. And on that note, hopefully we'll see you next Wednesday, 7 p.m., 5/17/2023. And for all those mothers out there, happy early Mother's Day. And we will see you next time, y'all. Peace and reparations.
The way it currently stands, forced labor, slavery takes precedence over rehabilitation and public safety.
Oh, by the way, while the Biden administration gives reparations to everyone but freed people, look at the billions he has run over to Ukraine.
We don't have black grocery stores because if you think about it now, just to get in that supply chain, it's almost unheard of.
They don't want the truth to get out. Okay? I don't want to know what my family did or what all these people did and all this stuff like that. Okay? Come on. You read that 500-page report.
There's this thing called white superiority and black inferiority. That mindset allows all of the behaviors that we've seen across generations.
I had no idea that church I was running by every day was something my grandfather established.
This is not a handout. This is a debt that is owed.
Allensworth was like the internet of his time in 1904, 1905.
The total black population in California is about 2.6 million, and then of that, the descendants compose about 2.2 million of that. So California, with a multi-billion-dollar surplus, can absolutely afford to satisfy the international terms for reparations, beginning with compensation.
Any financial obstacle that exists that impedes the success of increasing financial prosperity needs to be dealt with and eliminated.
No matter where we've been, no matter what part of this fight we've been in, we've been harmed, and we've had harm done to us specifically.
When I got to Los Angeles, This was some of the worst segregation I'd ever seen. And remember, I'm telling you, I'm from Mississippi.
Because as you can see, I'm giving you broken history right now, you know? But I had to give it to you guys today. I said, no, I gotta show them this because it's so precious and nobody really knows about it.
Overnight, it's like, oh, it's no longer the quarters, now it's Lincoln Heights. Oh, so now we get to use Abraham Lincoln for our name. And you think about all the other people that they could have used, but they picked Lincoln. And I think that's sort of stereotypical of what they do.
There wasn't any black restaurants. As far as black business and weed, it wasn't none.
Black people don't have that kind of luxury. Our historically black communities have been redistricted multiple times.
Why has it been easier for other groups than us?
Because of anti-black hatred.
Now listen, if you can't handle the TR room, don't tune in.